It's my pleasure to welcome our speaker for today. She is the founder of Thoughtlight, a Boston-based media agency, author of the textbook Marketing Analytics, a comprehensive guide, a highly rated and award-winning instructor here in the Harvard Division of Continuing Education, and the instructor of our Harvard Professional Development Program, Marketing Analytics, Strategy for Driving Business Results, Christina Inge.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks, Whitney. All right, well, welcome everybody. I am so excited to be meeting all of you today and be talking about marketing analytics in the ChatGPT era. As Whitney mentioned, my name is Christina Inge, and I am the founder of Thoughtlight, a digital marketing agency here in the Boston area, digital marketing and digital development agency. I'm also the author, as she mentioned, of a couple of books on marketing analytics and teach here in the Division of Continuing Education. I also work with a lot of students at Northeastern University as founding creative director of Husky Communications and the Northeastern University NU Media Lab. So that's a little bit about me. I'd like to hand it over and find out a little bit about you. Our first poll is, do you consider yourself marketing data savvy? And I'd like to just get a level set here of how confident we all feel in our use of marketing data. And it seems like we're split pretty evenly between yes, no, and maybe. Let that poll run for a little bit longer, but it seems like some of us feel very confident, some of us feel kind of sort of confident, and some of us not confident at all. And it really splits kind of evenly, really, with maybe being a bit larger, and I think we're all in the same boat. We maybe feel a little bit confident in some of our uses of marketing data. Other times, we really just don't know what we are seeing in our marketing data, and it's all changing so very rapidly now in 2023. We're halfway through the year, and we're seeing rapid changes in terms of things like ChatGPT, AI, privacy, and consumer data protection. So many different things are changing every single week that it's easy to feel like you're falling behind. So I'm glad that you're here at this webinar today. A little bit of a view of the agenda. First off, we're going to have a discussion. I'm going to talk about some trends, give you some case examples, and most importantly, give you some tips on how to better leverage analytics within your own organization. Then we're all going to do a sample activity. We're going to work through one small activity that's going to give you a taste of what you could learn in my upcoming fall class on marketing metrics and marketing analytics for managers. And then you're going to get to ask me questions live, and I'll try to answer as many of them as I can. So as we dive in, I'd like to ask all of you, what are some of the top things that you want to know about specifically? So we've level set around what is your level of comfort, but what would you like to learn a little bit more about today? And I do have some preset slides, but we're also going to dive into the topics that interest most people. And it looks like 83% of you want to know about ChatGPT. A lot of people want to know about how to understand customer journeys and understanding the return on your marketing investment. Attracting talent is less of an interest for all of you, and not too many of us are worried about whether our jobs are being replaced, but we are all curious about ChatGPT, and we want to know what our marketing ROI is. Great, I have got you on all of these topics. I can talk to all of these issues. So why is marketing analytics at the forefront of so many organizations' needs and concerns right now? Well, it's all about unleashing the power of the enormous amount of data that we have at our disposal. And organizations are using that data primarily for two main goals. One is to drive informed decision-making and make smarter strategic decisions because they're based on the data now and not on just gut feel. It's important to follow your gut as a marketer or as a business person, but it's even more important to make decisions based on the real data that's right in front of you. Oftentimes, data will tell us things that are counterintuitive, and we'll learn about that in some of the examples today. So it's really important for us to listen to our data. The other thing is organizations that use data have a competitive edge in the marketplace. The organizations that are doing what's in that second bullet point, making informed decisions based on data, have a competitive edge over organizations that just do things because that's the way it's always been done or it feels right. Looking at the data will almost always surprise you a little bit and give you new strategic directions you can't find if all you're doing is looking at things based on how we've always done things, or based on we have a gut feel that this is a good idea. So what are some of the ways in which marketing analytics is changing dramatically in some cases? Well, to some extent, we actually have less data available to us right now. Privacy protections, spearheaded really by Apple, have made it less easy to gather data on individual consumers. We are tracking consumers less as marketers, which I think is actually a good thing. We are not as able to see people's click behavior, their shopping behavior. We're not as able to see what they're doing on social media. And so we have less data on the individual consumer. However, the flip side of that is we actually have better predictions that we can make, that AI can make, and machine learning can make based on the data that we are collecting. Google Analytics is a case in point. Google Analytics used to just track absolutely everything that everyone was doing online. And for folks not familiar with marketing analytics, Google Analytics is the standard software tool that tracks people's behavior on the web and allows marketers, organizations in general, to be able to track people, how people are interacting with their website. It used to be that this was just the real data. Google Analytics and other web analytics tools, that is, tools that track how people behave on websites, would simply follow each website user and look at what they clicked on a website, how long they hovered on a page, what they bought, how many minutes from the time they arrived at the website to when they put something in their shopping cart, whether they read blog posts or the about page before or after putting something in the shopping cart, and even how they arrived at the website to begin with, whether they clicked on an ad, a social media post, or an email that was forwarded to them, or some other mechanism. Every little click that you engaged in on the web was being tracked. Now, a lot of that tracking is blocked because of consumer privacy laws, as well as non-legal just concerns that organizations are following along with voluntarily. But what has changed is that the predictive analytics, that is the machine learning, what we often commonly in common parlance call AI, models are getting better at taking what data is being collected and instead predicting people's likelihood, for instance, of making a purchase. So although we have less raw data, the tools that make predictions based on patterns in the data that we do have become much more powerful. At the same time that all of this is happening, we have dramatic changes in how data is helping us produce marketing content. We have things like ChatGPT and other generative language models that have taken over for many organizations writing blog posts. And a blog post that might have taken you hours to write previously, you now give ChatGPT a couple of prompts and you end up with a blog post within 30 seconds or less. So not only are we making better predictions, even though we're collecting less data, but that same data is being used across the web to make it easier for us to actually do our jobs and produce marketing content. A lot of us are worried that, well, what's that going to do to our jobs? But at the end of the day, ChatGPT and other generative models are really good at basic tasks, automating things that are, for instance, fairly straightforward and yet time-consuming for a human being to do, like outlining a simple blog post. They do not take over for strategic thinking, but they do take a lot of the basic work off of our shoulders. Another big strategy that I'm seeing is changes on the planning side of things. Organizations are getting better at and smarter at consolidating their data collection. Organizations used to have a really fragmented data landscape. We would be collecting data in a variety of different tools. Your email marketing team would be collecting data separately from your social media team, separately from your agency, and none of that data was really speaking to the other data that you were collecting, making it really hard to get a clear view of your customers, let alone a clear view of what parts of your marketing are working and what parts are not working. We are getting much better at building dashboards, which are consolidated data presentations that give you not only clear charts and tables, but actually take all of the data from different multiple sources and make it one big pool of data that you can make predictions for and use to understand your marketing. So those are the three trends that I'm seeing out there in the marketplace. Now, how are those being translated within specific organizations? Got a couple of case studies that I talk about in my book that might be very helpful to you as well. One is Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is using data and artificial intelligence to adjust their branding to cross-cultural needs. So Coca-Cola has a really strong core brand. We can all recognize their logo, we can recognize their containers, but did you know that Coca-Cola actually makes subtle adjustments to the way they present their brand in different geographic regions in order to align with what consumers expect in those different regions? And they can also make those adjustments simply to different demographics within a region, like people of different ages, different genders, different consumption patterns. And so Coca-Cola has been using AI to understand what their consumers want and need, and then at the same time, be able to adjust and deliver a branded experience that is tailored to what people want. One example that might fall into the area of things we don't even necessarily feel all that comfortable with is what they're doing with image recognition. Coca-Cola is using AI to look at every image that's posted to social media featuring a Coke bottle or a Coke can and determine the context in which that beverage is being consumed. For instance, if people take selfies with a can of Coke at a sports facility, the AI will register that, and it's constantly monitoring how often people take selfies with a Coke at, let's say, a concert or an outdoor festival versus a sports venue versus simply outside eating at a cookout. And they will use that to determine what kind of ads to run that will show the beverage being consumed in the same contexts where the AI is telling them people are taking selfies with the beverage. Now, either you think that's genius or you think that's the creepiest thing I've ever heard, but the reality is this is what brands can now do when they have the budget and they have the dedication to gathering data. They can look at selfies people are taking and posting to social media with their product and adjust their branding based on what people are doing with their product in different places. Now, if that spooks you a little bit, Mercedes-Benz is actually doing something similar, but in a little bit less invasive way. They got consumer insights from their digital analytics and found that there's a really strong affinity with nature and outdoor activity among Mercedes drivers. They gathered this data using similar tools to what Coca-Cola is using, for instance, looking at social media, looking at their web traffic, but also good old-fashioned surveying. And let's not forget that analytics and marketing data are not just about the latest and greatest digital tools. You can get excellent analytics from looking at surveys or conducting a focus group or any number of analog, offline, old-fashioned techniques as well. You don't need to be using the most invasive, latest and greatest digital tools. You don't need to be sophisticated in the use of those tools to get good insights and get good data. I started out in my career conducting surveys for market research that was one of the first things I did in my analytics career, and I still believe conventional market research can be an incredibly powerful tool. So if right now you're not using AI to look at every selfie that anybody takes that could contain your product, does not mean that you're not a sophisticated organization. Look at what Mercedes is doing. They used both conventional and digital techniques to find out that Mercedes drivers, somewhat counterintuitively, are actually really into outdoor activities. They then used that data to launch their Into the Wild campaign, which connected this brand that's not traditionally associated with camping and hiking with outdoor life. And that in turn, by using data, the creative marketing that they were doing to reach their consumers led to a significant increase in purchasing intent across the board. People were surveyed before and after this Into the Wild campaign went out, and people were much more likely to buy a Mercedes after the campaign happened. And so that's an example of data-driven marketing leading to direct and immediate success with high marketing ROI. This is an example from my own practice. As I mentioned before, my day job is I run the ThoughtLight digital marketing agency and digital content agency here in the Boston area. And one of our clients, Side by Side Pet, really needed a deeper understanding of the effectiveness of their marketing, and they also needed insights into their consumers. They're a holistic pet food brand, and they wanted to understand how their efforts to promote their better, healthier pet food were translating in the marketplace, and also what their consumers really wanted from their holistic dog food brand. What we did is we built them a comprehensive dashboard showing their promotions, their products, and the price points at which the products were selling, and looking at how are they acquiring their customers? What ad campaigns were most effective in terms of the messaging of those ad campaigns, the audiences that they were targeting, what products were selling the most in response to what marketing promotions. This dashboard went to over 20 pages, and it pulled in data from their website, from their search marketing, from their digital advertising, from their email promotions, and from their social media, as well as from their web store. And it put it all together into one panel that their executive team could use to understand which of their marketing campaigns are most successful, as well as which of their products are selling the best. As a result of building that dashboard, they developed a better understanding of what their consumers' motivations were to purchase their specialty high-end brand. They found, I'm not at liberty to reveal too much, but they found that many of their consumers were looking particularly to address certain health issues that were of concern to their pets, as well as simply ensure that their pets lived a longer and healthier life. This allowed them to create better marketing campaigns that would target people based on their motivations for purchasing from Side by Side Pet. They could write blog posts, create ads, all of which address the specific animal health needs that were bringing people to their website, address the specific health needs that their best-selling products were addressing in the product formulation, and by speaking the consumer's language, generate more sales. This took a long time. Pulling in different data from multiple different data sources can be very time-consuming, and this took a while to build. It took even longer to look at the data, collect enough data to really understand that it was telling us that people had these particular health concerns for their pets. And this is something that I want to stress when we talk about marketing analytics. It's not a one and done, and it's not something that people will do very quickly. It's something that takes patience, and it's something where you need to collect a lot of data in order to be able to effectively understand your consumers and understand your marketing. This can feel overwhelming, can't it? How am I going to build all of these dashboards? How am I going to, for goodness sakes, get an AI to look at every selfie people are posting to the web with my product? I don't know if I'm even comfortable with that. You don't need to be able to do all of this, and you don't need to know all of this as a manager. Here's what you need to know moving into the second half of 2023 and beyond as a manager in order to be effective at using marketing analytics. First of all, familiarize yourself with key concepts and terminology. Make sure that you understand the basic language. For instance, the difference between artificial intelligence and machine learning. I can talk about that a little bit as we move on. Actually, I can tell you right now. So artificial intelligence is when computers are able to make independent decisions and interpret data and take action on that. Most of what we call AI is actually not AI. It's something called machine learning. Machine learning is the underlying technology that enables AI, but it's much simpler. Machine learning simply looks at data sets and then makes predictions based on patterns that it's seeing in those data sets, or it categorizes information based on patterns that it sees in those data sets. So whenever, for instance, you are targeted by an ad, that's probably machine learning. There's simply a data set out there that says, for instance, that people who buy, I've got a prop on my desk here, you'll find if you take my class that I use a lot of props. People who buy blue pens on our website are more likely to also purchase a pair of reading glasses. This is simply looking at the data, seeing the pattern of blue pens equals more propensity to purchase reading glasses, and therefore upselling you an offer for reading glasses. There's no computer making a decision here. There's no sophisticated quote unquote thinking on the part of the computer. It's simply being trained to look for patterns of what products tend to sell with what others, and then automatically show you an ad for one product when you're browsing another that tends to sell together. That's not actually AI, even though we will also often call it AI. It's technically speaking just machine learning and predictive analytics, much simpler technologies and technologies that have been around for a very long time. Knowing the difference between those two is just one example of the kinds of key concepts and terminology that if you know, you will be ahead of the curve and ahead of a bunch of other marketers who are maybe just coming up in their knowledge of all of this. So as a manager, the first thing I would recommend is familiarize yourself with the key concepts. Don't worry about the tactics. Those things can be bought through an array of sophisticated tools that are available at lower and lower price points to us, even for free as marketers today. Understand the concepts because the tactics are always going to change. And as a manager, it's more your responsibility to understand the strategy and the core concepts rather than execute on the tactics. The next thing you really want to understand, especially in this era of increased concern around data privacy and consumer rights, as well as increased regulation around data privacy, is know your data sources and your collection methods. For every piece of data that your organization touches, uses, or passes on, you need to understand how was it collected, where is it being stored, how reliable is that collection method, and what is that data being used for. It's really important, and we're going to learn how to do that within my class, to conduct what's called a data audit. That's what it sounds very intimidating, but all a data audit is you go through all of the data sources within your organization and you get a handle on not only what data your organization can leverage, but also whether you could be potentially legally exposed. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but I work with data a lot. What data could legally expose you to liability or just ethically expose you to consumers feeling betrayed that you've been using their data. So understand your data both from the standpoint of ethics and morality, but also from the standpoint of how are you going to use that data to best advantage that you have collected ethically is really critical as a manager as well. And finally, what you really want to get good at is interpreting and applying analytical insights. Going back to my earlier slide, the organizations that succeed today are going to be the ones that get smart about using data. So you want to get good at interpreting your data and making smart strategic decisions. There's a really big difference that we talk about in marketing analytics between prescriptive, predictive, and descriptive analytics. Descriptive analytics is simply analytics that looks at what's happening within your organization and says, oh, this is happening. So for instance, let's say you're an eyeglass store. Descriptive analytics would be saying reading glasses are selling better than driving glasses. And I've got like 16 different pairs of glasses hanging around my office because I'm old. So anyway, that would be descriptive analytics. It's not telling you what to do with that information. It's simply giving you a simple observation. That's descriptive analytics. Predictive analytics is saying that because every time the weather is gray or rainy for a few days at a time, people spend more time indoors reading, and therefore they buy reading glasses more. We should probably expect to sell more reading glasses. That's predictive analytics. You're thinking, I'm going to sell more reading glasses because of what's happening. And then here is prescriptive analytics. Prescriptive analytics is when you actually take that data that says, I'm going to sell more reading glasses now, and you use that to take action within your organization. And what can you do with that data? It used to be that you really had to choose and set priorities. Do we want to enhance customer retention by personalizing the information people get via all of our marketing channels? For instance, let's say you've got people on your mailing list, you know that half of your audience are in a place where rain is predicted for the next couple of days, and you then personalize the emails that you're sending to people by giving them more offers to reading glasses. That's one way in which people used to be able to improve their customer retention, upselling and cross-selling their customers. Another thing would be you would try to boost your conversion rates or your acquisition of new customers through targeted marketing. That would be, for instance, you've got customers out there you have not yet signed up, people who maybe haven't even heard of your organization, and you decided to target people around the web with, let's say, an ad on Instagram for reading glasses in places where the weather was gray and rainy. Most organizations would try to take an either or approach. They'd either focus all of their time and energy on retaining their existing customers by selling them more or increasing their loyalty, or they would try to go out there and acquire new customers by predicting who is more likely to buy, both with analytics. The reason most organizations felt the need to choose was because analytics was very time consuming, it was very costly to use these tools, and they just did not have the resources, usually, to do both. Only the really biggest enterprises had the bandwidth to do both. Analytics tools, price points are coming down, and their ability to engage in predictive modeling is getting better and better and going up and up. Time was when Google Analytics, which again is the #1 tool organizations use to predict people's behavior on the web, didn't even know how to do predictive analytics. All it could do was descriptive analytics. It could tell you what people were clicking on your website, but it couldn't predict who on your website right now was more likely to buy. You had to have an expensive enterprise tool to make those kinds of predictions. Now you can make those kinds of predictions with the free tool Google Analytics 4. So we have much more powerful tools at our disposal as machine learning and AI become more and more powerful and therefore more accessible to all of us as the technology gets better and more sophisticated and deployed in more contexts. So we can now do more with the free and low-cost tools that we have and the resources that we have. Now, a lot of people are worrying about what's called the cookie apocalypse, or they've heard that something bad is happening with cookies, but they may not know what that is, may not even know what cookies are. But it all ties into my other observation of what's happening with analytics in 2023 and beyond, which is we have less data, even as we're making better predictions. So what does it mean that we have less data? Cookies are little bits of code that attach to your browser and track your behavior online. A cookie can be completely benign. For instance, it can be a tracking piece of code that's added to your browser by a company that you do business with in order to make it easier for you to log in or pick up where you left off when you were last on their website. For instance, hanging on to what was in your shopping cart or reminding you of your search history on their website. That's what's called a first-party cookie. A first-party cookie is widely used by all websites to enhance the user experience. And yes, it's collecting data on you that the organization you're doing business with then uses to target you, but it's something that you've opted into by utilizing that website. Then there's something called the third-party cookie. The third-party cookie collects data about you on behalf of, let's say, an ad network or some other entity, and it feeds that data from your browser where it's tracking you back into a centralized database where that information can be used by advertisers you've never even heard of to target you. Now, there's a gray area that is occupied by Google and Meta, who are tracking you using first-party cookies as part of your role as a user of Meta products or of Google products, but they're also selling access to that data to advertisers. For the most part, though, most of the tracking that happens on your browser that you tend not to know about or have not necessarily opted into is using third-party cookies. Those cookies are going away. They were supposed to go away entirely this year. There's been a little bit of a delay on that, but if you are using, for instance, the Safari browser, you're probably not being tracked by a lot of third-party cookies. So this tracking on behalf of ad networks that then advertisers can use to target you is what's going away when, this is what people talk about when they say the end of cookies or the cookie apocalypse, it's often called rather cutely. It's the fact that browsers are now often blocking any tracking that uses third-party cookies. This has significantly impacted the amount of data that marketers can collect about all of us. It isn't necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, because at the end of the day, you're still being tracked by Meta, which owns Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram. You're still being tracked across the web by Google. You're still being tracked. It's just one small part of that tracking landscape that is tied to third-party cookies that's going away. Nonetheless, even with the end of these third-party cookies, we are actually getting a clearer idea of our customer journey, a better idea of where our marketing spend is going, and more accurate predictions of what your consumers want, do, and need in the market at any time. Why? Because just as these cookies have become less and less popular because consumers don't want them and they're being blocked in response to consumer demand by the browser makers, our predictive analytics tools are getting more and more powerful. Small amounts of data, for instance, of who's coming to your website, Google can actually use that information to then look at huge data sets of everyone who's not only come to your website, but people who are searching on the web right now for similar products to what you sell on your website, and use that to predict what they're going to do next. And through that predictive modeling that's getting better and better, you are able to now get a better sense of what content are people interacting with that brings them to your website, what they're more likely to buy, when they're more likely to buy, and who they're more likely to be. This in turn is giving you a better idea of where your marketing spending is going. It's getting much easier to be able to tell, for instance, whether somebody who came to your website and made a large purchase has ever been exposed to a social media post of yours. Even if you couldn't track that direct click, Google can look at big data sets of everybody who's on social media, everybody who buys products similar to yours, and see that on average, most people who are exposed to a social media message are, X% more likely to buy. Thus, if you're a certain amount active on social media and your sales are going up, a certain percentage Google Analytics can predict, and that's just one analytics tool, are very likely to have interacted with you on social media, even if you haven't tracked that before they made a purchase. So you're getting better and better at attributing where your marketing efforts are paying off by looking at these giant data sets, and without tracking any individual user, creating large anonymized data sets that see big patterns in how organizations across the board are spending their marketing dollars and what the results they are getting from that are. This in turn not only will retroactively help you understand where you did right with your marketing in the past, but it'll allow you to have better and more accurate predictions of what people are likely to do in the future. For instance, if you know that people who are exposed to your social media messaging are 80% more likely to buy from you, you now can predict that if someone has seen your social media messaging, they're a good target for a coupon, a loyalty program, or an upsell because of that propensity to buy. And that's just one example. ChatGPT and generative models have been in the news a lot more, however, than this kind of predictive analytics. So what do I think we're going to be doing with ChatGPT in the future? We've talked about predictive analytics. We've talked about descriptive analytics. We've talked about how we can use data to understand our customers and understand our marketing spend and our customer journey. But that's not what a lot of us are worried about or curious about. We're curious about an entirely different kind of analytics, which is ChatGPT, generative models, tools that use data to actually produce content, not to understand our customers, but to produce content. Here are some of the applications that I'm seeing. First of all, ChatGPT types of tools are the underlying technology of Google and increasingly becoming the underlying technology of Google. It's shifting. Google is still using a lot of its old algorithms, but the new algorithms are based on things like Project Magi that use generative language models to better understand when you or I type a search or speak a search into a search engine, what it is we really, really want. I always use this example with my clients. Let's say you are trying to sell pink file folders. Nowadays, if you really want to find pink file folders as a consumer, you would have to literally type in pink file folder, because if you just type in the word pink, you're probably going to get ads for and Wikipedia results for the musical artist Pink instead, or the Victoria's Secret brand. You have to be pretty exact in describing what it is you want in order to get a Google search. From an advertiser standpoint, that means that you can only reach people when you have a clear understanding of what it is they're searching for and how they're articulating those needs. Through models like ChatGPT, types of models like Google is using in Project Magi, it's going to better able the search engines, that is, Google as well as the others, some people still use Bing, it's going to be better able to customize people's search results and predict that you need pink file folders, even if all you do is type in pink because you have been searching all day for office supplies. Google will get better and better at then understanding that if in that context you've been searching all day for office supplies, you type in pink, you're probably not looking for concert tickets, you're looking for some kind of pink office supply. Now that's years in the future. I ran this search today. I searched for just pink. It did not guess that I needed office supplies. It thought I wanted the musical artist Pink. But in the future, Google is going to be able to better guess what we're thinking about using generative AI models like similar to what you now get with ChatGPT. Look at how smart ChatGPT is. All you have to do is type in one sentence and it can write an entire blog post. And again, I use the term smart, even though computers can't really think, they can only reproduce what we've taught them to do. So in the future, you're going to have a different set of data to understand what your users want. You don't have to necessarily know precisely the words that they're typing into Google in order to understand their searches. Instead, you have to have a more holistic idea of the contexts in which they're looking for products and services. That's just one example. Another example of what ChatGPT and generative models are going to do is that they really, again, are taking over a lot of the basic functions of marketing. As I mentioned before, they are the simpler functions of marketing, like writing basic ad copy, creating basic brand books, like finding the right colors and fonts to use in a Canva post that you're creating for social media. Those little tasks that used to take up hours of our day are increasingly things that can be automated. I can now generate a brand book with all of a brand's colors and fonts within a couple of seconds using the AI that's built into, for instance, MailChimp. And that makes it a lot easier to get back to our real jobs as marketers, which is actually coming up with the creative strategy behind a brand rather than just pulling levers and writing up tedious brand books, blog post outlines, and things that, again, take away a lot of our strategic time. Another thing that's increasingly not on our plates as marketers is testing and optimization of ad copy or any other kind of marketing creative. There was a time when if you wanted to figure out whether people would prefer to click on an ad for, let's say, a bound on the side notebook versus a notebook that's bound on the top, you would have to have manually created several ads, one featuring one notebook, one featuring the other, deployed those ads again manually to the same exact audience, be sure it's going to the same exact audience, run the ads for a while, determine how long you needed to run the ads, and then crunch all the numbers as to what ad was doing the best. Those days are over. Nowadays, you can simply upload a couple of ads, maybe even have an AI generate the ads, and you have automatically the ability to test and see which of your ads is performing the best. This is a constantly evolving situation right now. The platforms are changing all the time. And so what these AI tools can do is becoming more and more powerful by the moment. The important thing to remember, though, is that these tools are automating tasks that none of us thought were very fun to begin with. Hands up everybody who thinks it's fantastic fun to manually write up what fonts are approved and not approved to create in a social media post. Or who really enjoyed creating 15 different versions of an ad, tracking all of them in a spreadsheet, and then manually uploading every single one of them and running test after test to see which performed the best. Some of us have, over the years, made a good living doing these things, but they were never the core of what marketing is. The core of what marketing is human beings understanding other human beings' needs. And it's those human insights that are actually forming the input into these ChatGPT models. These ChatGPT models do not have a lot of original ideas. The ideas are still yours as a marketer. You are the one who understands that consumers have different preferences in their notebook styles. All that ChatGPT and the other AI tools are doing is helping you write the ad copy or automate the testing to see which notebook is more popular this week or this month. It's not coming up with the marketing ideas, so your job is safe. So how do you actually start to get your arms around what's happening right now with marketing analytics? One of the things you really want to pay attention to is you want to start consolidating your data collection. The most robust predictive models really depend on having good, reliable data. Reliable data is, first of all, as large a data set as you can possibly get. You want to make sure that you're collecting all of the information and all of the data that you possibly can legally and ethically, because the more data you have, the more accurate the predictions are going to be that a predictive model can make. Again, conduct that important data audit and consolidate all of your data into as few platforms as possible, ideally into something like a data lake or at least into a dashboard, so that you can understand all of the information you have on your consumers and your marketing performance. At that point, you're going to be able to generate far better insights the more data points that you're utilizing, even as we are prohibited from or less able to gather some data from third-party cookies. You're still going to be able to utilize the data that you do have because it's well consolidated. Bringing together all our data in one system for a full view of what is happening is absolutely vital right now. Or again, remember to do a data audit. You also want to implement something called data governance, which is making sure that the data you're collected is clean, that it's accurate, that you know what's coming in and what's going out in terms of your data, and that it's all legally compliant. It's also important to have some people who know data science on your team, or work with a vendor that actually produces the kinds of predictive modeling tools that you need, because all of the data in the world is not going to help you make predictions effectively if you don't have the right algorithms running in the background making predictions accurately. There's so many different predictive algorithms out there. It's not just one monolith that AI is. You want to be sophisticated in your use of tools. So now we're going to do a quick little activity. I can't see any of you, and it's difficult in a group this large. It's telling me there's 277 participants for us all to have an interactive conversation. But I wanted to maybe give you a little bit of a preview. In fact, I want to give you a preview of what you could be learning in my September program, or what you should be doing within your own organization. I want to give you maybe a thought activity. How would it change your marketing if you understood your customer journey? In other words, if you could understand every step a consumer took to become a customer, what would that achieve? Would it change where you spend your marketing dollars? Would it change the type of customers that you're trying to reach? Would it change how your marketing organization is configured? One thing that's often useful is to think about what is the data that we're collecting. And if we could understand one thing about our customers or our organization, how would that change our organization's behavior, and how would we be able to do things better or differently? Things to think about to help you further reaching this goal is think about, how are you using consumer data right now to understand your customers? Where are the gaps in that information? Where are you particularly successful in understanding your customers? And then think about what data points that you're missing right now that would make the biggest impact. So in other words, if you don't know what channels are most effective at acquiring customers, what would it do if you understood what channels are most effective at acquiring your customers? If you don't understand who your customers are demographically, in terms of their age, their location, their gender, their buying habits, what would it do if you understood that? What are you missing right now in your data collection? And how is that impacting your ability to serve your customers, or understand your customers better, and understand how they become your customers? So that is all I've got right now about marketing analytics. Again, things are changing very rapidly. ChatGPT and other predictive analytics, generative language models are not going to take our jobs anytime soon. But what it is doing, what they all are doing, is shifting what parts of our jobs have been automated and what we're free to do now with the extra time that we have. The tactical work of gathering data, making it actionable, and testing and optimization, those things are increasingly being automated away. And what that's helping us do is make better strategic decisions. If, as a manager, you can make better strategic decisions using data, you're going to have an edge organizationally and individually as a manager. It's the managers who are smart with data who are going to be winning in the future, and that's what I hope to teach you. So we have one final poll. My question to you is, what is the bigger priority you have right now? Keeping your current customers, acquiring new customers, or are both equally important? And we can see here, both are equally important is really leading at 86%. And that's exactly the power of today's analytics landscape. We can do both now. Analytics have become so powerful through not just ChatGPT, but a host of other tools that we can now both acquire new customers as well as make the customers we already have happier than ever. And that will enable us as marketing-driven managers. All right, now with that, I want to open it up to Q&A. We have a ton of questions coming through. And I want to open that up to the questions.
Thank you, Christina. Yeah, I've been taking your questions. Thank you, everybody. The first question I have is, is it not that you know all the algorithms, but like, thinking about ChatGPT and how it might change the search world, is there anything that people should be thinking about to get ahead of how this might change SEO strategies and to change what we're doing in marketing as people might as that changes, as the landscape changes in search?
That's a really good question. I would say that search has become increasingly fragmented, and this is a trend that predates ChatGPT by a lot. There was a survey at one point that something like 40% of Gen Y, consider TikTok to be a good search engine for them to find information. So people have already, over the past few years, that trend has started of people searching in a variety of different places. ChatGPT is becoming a de facto search engine for a lot of people. What I would recommend people do right now is start monitoring how well you're showing up in ChatGPT research. I find that a lot of organizations are just not showing up in ChatGPT. And so you want to monitor that just as much as you would be monitoring your Google search positioning as well as your social media search positioning. ChatGPT is another thing to monitor. As far as optimizing for ChatGPT, the jury's still out what you can do, but a lot of what you can do to optimize for Google searches also works for ChatGPT. So good content, making sure that you have credible inbound links, making sure you have substantial and substantive content, that all can help you with ChatGPT search. But right now, hang tight. It's an evolving space, but monitor whether you're showing up in ChatGPT research at all, because it is going to significantly impact the search landscape moving forward.
Great, thanks. When people are thinking of the skills on their resume, the things that they're, pitching when they're in a job interview, what are those analytics skills, tools, as well as kind of managerial skills that they should know and be able to sell as digital marketers?
Number one, I would say get familiar with Google Analytics. It is the standard web analytics tool, and de facto, because most of us, live through our web presence as organizations, it's the core of most organizations' analytics operations. So get good at Google Analytics, and then also get good at building, interpreting, and presenting dashboards and visualizations. That can achieve two things. One is it shows that you can communicate with data. It also shows that you can interpret and analyze data. At the end of the day, the technical tactics matter less and less as you get more advanced in your career, but really being able to understand and interpret data and present those findings to the C-suite, those are critical. But if you're more beginner in your career, definitely make sure you're familiar with some of those tools. Make sure that you have worked with ChatGPT in a professional context to generate content or do research, and that you can answer questions in job interviews around how you've used it, and be familiar with at least one analytics tool. And I recommend Google Analytics because it's the most common, and also because it's free to study.
Great. How reliable is ChatGPT and other generative models when they're giving you an output? Do you feel like you can trust it 100%? What would you say on that?
I have used ChatGPT, for instance, to research articles in a fairly non-specialized field, and it's given me a lot of information, but a ton of the links that it gave me were broken. It's very good at generating super general content that is not specific to any one organization's brand. You can tweak it and tune it a little bit to brand voice, but a lot of the factual information, even since its update, is not very accurate. You have to double check every link, every fact that it gives you against Google. I would never use it alone to do research without also doing Google research. And in terms of its creative output, it's really good at creating things that are super generic. But if you want to create something that's unique and stands out and really reflects your brand, that's still a human effort. And I think it's still going to remain a human effort. And honestly, if everyone's generating super bland generic articles using ChatGPT, it's not going to help you rank anymore because everybody's doing the same thing. And search rankings, for instance, you tend to go to organizations that have something unique and interesting to say. So too does social media search ranking and social media visibility. So use it for background tasks, but never rely on it factually. And certainly it should not be the voice or face of your brand or be used to create the voice or face of your brand, because then you're just like everybody else. It's good at creating content, inaccurate content, that's just like everybody else's. Absolutely do not use it as a standalone.
Great advice. What would you give advice to people who are working on like a smaller team that, maybe can't hire a huge agency to help on data, or don't have maybe an analytics person to focus on when it comes to using data in making marketing decisions?
Great question. I would suggest 3 things. One, automate as much as possible with the evolution of ChatGPT, as well as the greater power of some of these analytics tools. Stuff that you have to do manually, like testing and optimization, you can now do it completely automatically. So learn what tools can automate your job and automate anything that's not strategic and that doesn't really drive value, but is just a background task. Like outlining blog posts, testing and optimization, you don't need to do any of that anymore. The next thing to do is, again, consolidate your data. Get a good data audit, and then make sure that all of your data is consolidated in a single dashboard and in as much as possible like a single place, because nothing wastes more time and stretches your resources than the friction inherent in not knowing where your data is, or always constantly having to check and confirm that it's reliable. So do a data audit first. It's like organizing your home. It's absolutely going to help you in the long run, and then you're not searching for your reading glasses everywhere. And then finally, pick a single source of truth, whether it's your web analytics tool or whether it's your consolidated dashboard, and spend most of your time analyzing your data from that one source that is as comprehensive as possible, so that you can get to the stage where you can quickly look at your data like every morning or every week, make some predictions, make some decisions based on it, and then move on and test and optimize. And I guess my 4th suggestion is always be testing, always be improving what you're doing, then gathering data on whether those improvements made a difference, and then acting on all of the data you're bringing in that tested out different theories, whether it's your targeting, whether it's your creative or anything else. Always be testing. It's something I believe in very strongly.
Great. And final question, can you recommend an alternative or even a different focus outside of AI if your company doesn't allow ChatGPT, or if that's not your focus? If ChatGPT not the focus, what else should people focus on or use?
Well, it depends on what the purpose is. So if you're specifically not allowed to use generative language models, think about what you would be using it for. Like, would you be using it to generate blog posts? The alternative to that would potentially then be, I guess the question is so broad, I'm not sure I understand. Alternative for what purpose?
I would say first, is there just like another software or something, or generative model that somebody could use? And then like maybe if someone's like, I don't want to use ChatGPT, what's another good ROI place to focus in the marketing analytics realm?
The answer to the first one is yes. There's a ton of paid tools out there that are very similar to ChatGPT. I don't want to name any brands. I don't, want to endorse anybody, but I do use a paid tool that is very similar to ChatGPT and actually has been around longer than ChatGPT and is more powerful than it. So Google for ChatGPT tools, and the names will come up. One of the top ones, for instance, is I believe it's now called Jarvis, but there's a ton of tools out there that do the same thing, that are paid and have pretty low price points. So just search online. But like I mentioned, one of them is called, it's either called Jasper or Jarvis. It used to be called Jasper, I believe, and is now called Jarvis. that's a tool that you can use. There's tons of other alternatives as well. And in terms of where you could focus that has higher ROI, I'm going to actually flip that question around, because I don't believe that ChatGPT is where the highest ROI is right now anyway. I believe that it's in consolidating your analytics data and making it actionable through building bigger models with more data, more robust and higher varieties of data. And I see an anonymous attendee just asked, what are some platforms to consolidate it? You could be using Tableau, you could be using R, you could be using Python. Google has a really nice dashboarding tool as well. That's where I think the highest ROI is anyway. So forget about ChatGPT. If you have not already done a data audit and consolidated all of your data into one place, that's going to have the highest ROI anyway, because it's going to give you a handle on your data. And if you want to learn more, you should take my course.
Perfect way to end. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Christina, for presenting and for all of that insight. If you are interested in learning more about this and really delving into marketing analytics and how you can use that to have better, competitive marketing and, consolidate your data and all of that, Christina teaches a fantastic program with Harvard Professional Development starting September 7th. You'll get an email with the webinar recording and more information about that program next week from us. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you again, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.